One of the greatest musical groups of our time deserves a biography of the appropriate scale. The permanent drummer of the immortal band, and the only constant member of all its compositions, sets out his personal view of the history of the world-famous band in a book he called Inside Out. Nik Meyson was born in 1944 in Birmingham. He is best known as the drummer for Pink Floyd. The Pink Floyd group originated from two partially overlapping companies. One developed in Cambridge, where Roger, Syd Barrett, David Gilmour and many people of the future environment of Floyd were from. The other, Roger, Rick, and myself, was formed in my freshman year of architecture at Regent Street Polytechnic. After the failure of my early piano and violin exercises, I found brushes to be a good enough reason to become a drummer. I purchased my first setup from Chas Eatfoot on Denman Street in Soho, a Gigster barrel, a snare drum of indeterminate age and provenance, cymbals, and a manual that I still try to decipher to this day. In general, I armed myself with this stunning arsenal, and my friends and I created the group the Hot Rods. Rick was born in Pinner, in Hatch End, on the outskirts of London. Rick learned to play using his own fingerings and later, encouraged by his Welsh mother Daisy, took the same approach to the piano. This self-taught method provided Rick with a unique sound and style, and also likely ruined his career teaching musical technique at the conservatory. In my freshman year, Rick, Roger, and I were in a band formed by Clive Metcalfe, also a tech student who played duets with fellow student Keith Noble. I'm quite sure that Clive was the original driving force of the band. He really knew how to somehow play the guitar and obviously spent many hours memorizing different songs. Everyone else was recruited more on the basis of the most casual "yeah, I've been playing a bit" than on the basis of keen enthusiasm. This first Polytechnic group, Sigma 6, consisted of Clive, Keith Noble, Roger, and Rick and me. In addition, Clive's sister Sheila provided occasional vocal assistance. Rick's position as a keyboardist was rather precarious as he didn't have an electric piano. If there was a piano in the pub, Rick played it, although without an amplifier it is unlikely that anyone could hear him over the drums and box AC 30 amps. If the piano was not in the pub, Rick threatened to bring a trombone. Like all up-and-coming bands, we spent a lot more time talking, planning and coming up with names than rehearsing. Performances were not frequent. Until 1965, none of them were strictly commercial, since they were organized by us or our classmates for personal rather than public purposes. The norm was end-of-semester parties, someone's birthday, and other student parties. We rehearsed in the basement cafeteria of the Polytechnic, where, along with songs suitable for student parties, like I'm a Crawling King Snake and some The Searchers stuff, we worked on songs written by Clive Metcalfe's friend, another of our classmates, Ken Chapman. Ken soon became our manager and songwriter. He commissioned flyers for our services at parties, as well as printed testimonies of our career called The Architectural of Dabs, a rather nondescript group photo and an article in the student newspaper in which we favored rhythm and blues over rock. In September 1963, when we were in our sophomore year at the Poly, Clive and Keith decided to break out on their own as a duo, and the next version of the group began to coalesce around the house owned by Mike Leonard. Mike, who was then in his 30s, was a part-time teacher at the Polytechnic University and, in addition to architecture, was fond of the interaction of rhythm, movement, and light, which he enthusiastically told us in lectures. In September 1963, in addition to teaching at the Hornsey School of Art, Mike bought a house in North London and decided to take on boarders to keep costs down. Roger and I thought it was the perfect fit and we moved in. Stanhope Gardens has changed the way we play music. Thanks to a condescending landlord, we had a permanent rehearsal space. In fact, at one time we even called the band Leonard's Lodgers. Rehearsals were held in the living room, where all the equipment was. Unfortunately, this made it very difficult to study and almost impossible to sleep, since the same living room served as the bedroom for Roger and me. Neighbors naturally complained about the noise. Their threats of an injunction never materialized, but sometimes, just in case, we alleviated their suffering by renting a rehearsal room nearby, at the Railway Tavern on Arquay Road. Mike has never had any complaints. In fact, he became an active participant in the rehearsals. Mike was a decent piano player, and we convinced him to buy a Farfisa Duo electric organ and become our keyboardist for a while. Mike still keeps this tool with him. Another huge plus was that through Mike we got access to the experiments with light and sound in Hornsey. Roger worked there for hours with the projection machines and, in fact, became Mike's assistant. So we lived our entire sophomore year at Stanhope Gardens. The next truly significant change in our fortunes was the appearance of Bob Close in September 1964. Bob, another product of Cambridgeshire Boys High School, came to London with Syd Barrett and entered the architecture school 2 years after us. Bob's reputation as a guitarist was well known and well deserved. Going to the guitar shop with Bob was a joy, for even the most arrogant salesman was impressed by his jazzy Mickey Baker chords and lightning-fast finger work, although from our point of view, Bob was wrong to prefer more conservative semi-acoustic guitars over the Fender Stratocaster. With Bob, we felt more confident musically, but with Keith Noble and Clive Metcalf leaving both the Poly and the band, we were in desperate need of a vocalist. And Bob brought Chris Dennis to us. Chris and I broke up pretty soon after Syd Barrett started playing with us on a regular basis. Roger knew Syd from Cambridge. Roger's mother taught Syd in elementary school. Syd grew up in Cambridge and, perhaps, in terms of bohemian and liberal education, he was ahead of us all. His old friend David Gilmore had already studied there in the Department of Modern Languages. The two got along very well, sitting down at lunchtime with guitars and harmonicas. Syd was handsome, charming, funny, played some guitar and smoked weed from time to time. When he joined our group in London, no sudden shift. Our musical tastes have not happened. Syd was quite satisfied with the cover versions of Bo Diddley, the Rolling Stones and other rhythm and blues, which were mainly our repertoire. Storm also recalls that Syd adored the Beatles, although most of his friends preferred the Stones. Sometime around Christmas 1964 we went into the studio for the first time. This we contrived to achieve through a friend, Rick, who worked at a studio in West Hampstead and let us in for free during the downtime. We recorded a new version of the old blues standard I'm a King Bee and 3 songs by Syd, Double O Bo, a cross between Bo Diddley and the 007 theme, Butterfly, and Lucy Leave. These songs became our demos. We recorded them on 1/4-inch tape, pressed them on limited edition vinyl, and they were invaluable to us, as many venues required demo recordings even before live listening. Curiously enough, around the same time, Rick released his song You're the Reason Why. It appeared on the B-side of the single Little Baby by Adam, Mike and Tim. Rick received a £75 advance for this recording, years before we all knew what not royalty was. Later, in the spring of 1965, we were able to register at the Countdown Club in the basement of 1A Palace Gate, off Kensington High Street. The Countdown Club was under a hotel or apartment building, and understandably there were noise problems. There was no thematic decoration or special atmosphere in the club. It was open for the music, the clientele was relatively young, and the booze was very cheap. The club was not advertised. Apparently, the owners of the club expected to attract groups like us, so that they, in turn, attracted large companies of their friends for support, and these friends were energetically refreshed at the club bar. At the Countdown Club we played from 9 o'clock in the evening until 2 in the morning, taking a couple of breaks. 3 1.5-hour sets meant that by the end of the show, when we were running out of prepared routines and alcohol was dulling the audience's short-term memory, we would begin to overtly repeat ourselves. We also guessed that these numbers can be significantly lengthened with beautiful solos. Our repertoire grew, a small but persistent group of adherents formed around us. We used amplifiers from the very beginning, but after just 2 or 3 successful gigs, the club got a noise reduction order. We were so desperate to work, these were our only paid gigs at the time, that we offered to play acoustic. Roger got hold of a double bass, Rick swept the dust off the piano, Bob and Sid started playing acoustic guitars, and I picked up the brushes. I recall that our repertoire then included How High the Moon, one of Bob's signature numbers, as well as Long Tall Texan, but all other songs have long been forgotten. In the summer of 1965, Bob Close left the group at the urging of both his father and the Institute's teachers. Bob surreptitiously played with us a few more times, but although we lost our supposedly most skilled guitarist, we didn't really care. Throughout the fall we still played in a band, usually called the T-Set, but now we have an alternate name Sid came up with. It appeared under the pressure of circumstances. We played as a T-Set at an RAF base, probably in Northolt near London, and there you go. Surprisingly discovered that another band with the same name should play there. I'm not sure if the other T-Set group had the right of seniority, they performed earlier or later, but we had to urgently change the name. Sid effortlessly produced the name The Pink Floyd Sound, using the names of 2 venerable bluesmen, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council. We may have stumbled upon them in our blues quests, but the names were not particularly familiar to us. Sid basically came up with the idea, and the name stuck. In extremely rare cases, we left to perform outside of London and even for money. At one event we played at a large country mansion called the High Pines in Esher, Surrey, and in October 1965 we played at a big birthday party in Cambridge for Storm Thorgerson's girlfriend Libby January and her twin sister Rosie. In addition to us, Joker's Wild, with a certain David Gilmour playing, and a young folk singer named Paul Simon played there that night. Our next big break was a performance at the Marquee Club in March 1966. Before him, our reputation rested on Sid as the lead vocalist and the intriguing performances of the Sound and Light Laboratory at the Hornsey School. We never managed to expand our repertoire. Beyond 4 or 5 original songs, most of which we recorded back in the studio at Broadhurst Gardens in preparation for the demo. The only performance that could draw attention to us was at the University of Essex. At this colorful ball, we had to share the stage with the Swinging Blue Jeans, who actually appeared there, and with Marianne Faithfull, whose performance was only announced if she manages to return from Holland in time. All this was not very encouraging. At that time we were still called T-Set, but already, apparently, we created the impression that we were moving on to psychedelia, because, despite the presence in our repertoire of the song Long Tall Texan accompanied by acoustic guitars, someone prepared oil slides for us and film projector. Obviously, thanks to one of the participants in this ball or the subsequent rumor, we were invited to the Marquee Club. We regarded the invitation to Marquee as a great opportunity to break into the club network, although it turned out that the performance would take place as part of an event called Trip, a private and completely separate event, for which the whole club was rented. It was a Sunday afternoon. Not a single regular client of the Marca was going there. The event turned out to be very strange. We used to play at rhythm and blues parties where the entrance fee was the price of a keg of ale. And here we suddenly found ourselves as happening performers, where we were enthusiastically greeted by those very long solos that we actually used to stuff songs in the Countdown Club. The organizers invited us to continue to participate in similar Sunday events at Marquee, which later became known as Spontaneous Underground. Lucky, otherwise we would never have met Peter Jenner. Peter recently graduated from Cambridge, although during his time at the university he did not encounter any of the crowds that clustered around Pink Floyd. The abyss always separated the university from the city. Peter taught at the Department of Social Administration at the London School of Economics, and also participated in the work of a recording studio called DNA. According to him, he was musical psycho, especially shifted to jazz and blues. He founded DNA with Johns Hopkins, Felix Mendelssohn, and Ron Atkins to implement their very wide range of musical interests. We wanted DNA to be avant-garde, meaning any avant-garde, jazz, folk, classical, pop. One fine Sunday afternoon at the end of the academic year, Peter was checking a pile of student papers and at some point reached the point where he desperately needed to go outside and get some fresh air. I decided that if DNA wants to stay afloat, we need a pop band. And then I saw the Pink Floyd sound at the Marquee Club that Sunday. I thought, however, that the word sound in the title is clearly superfluous. I remember this performance very clearly. The band mostly played rhythm and blues, all sorts of Louie Louie and Dust My Broom that everyone was playing at that time. I could not make out the text, but no one listened to the texts then. What intrigued me was that instead of wailing guitar solos in the middle of the song, they made some kind of strange noise. It took me a long time to figure out what it was. And then it turned out that it was Sid and Rick. Sid did all sorts of weird things with feedback on his Benson EQ. Rick gave strange, long, sliding passages. And Nick pounded with wooden hammers. That's what got me. It was the avant-garde. Buying. When the members of the Pink Floyd sound reunited in London after the summer holidays of 1966, Peter Jenner still wanted to meet us. Finally he came to Stanhope Gardens and said, Our label will be happy to sign you." Roger told him we didn't need a label, but we needed a manager. This event instantly ignited our vague fantasies of success, all those dreams that might otherwise have evaporated by the end of the summer. The persistence of the new acquaintance slightly surprised us, but we were ready to jump at any opportunity and eventually agreed that Peter and his partner Andrew King would become the band's managers. Andrew King recalls how during this discussion I said, "Anyway, no one wants to be our manager, so go ahead." We thought it was a significant step forward. We had a chance to get what we needed if we wanted to turn from amateurs into professionals, regular performances, a guarantee of payment, a certain level of trust and some decent equipment. In addition to the promised permanent work and the new equipment that has already become a reality, the Jenner King team provided us with a link to the emerging underground movement in London. At the performances in the hall of the Church of All Saints, light shows played an important role. The concerts were perceived as happenings, and people were encouraged to participate in them in every possible way. Initially, the slides were projected by an American couple, Joel and Tony Brown. By the time they had to return to the States, the light shows were already important enough that Peter, his wife Sumi, and Andrew built a new projector. In order to save money and because of the lack of acquaintances in the theater lighting community, Andrew and Peter decided not to use professional lighting companies, but instead went straight to the local electrical store and stocked up on homemade spotlights, ordinary switches, gels and push pins. They must have been mistaken for professional builders and given a wholesale discount. All this standard lighting equipment was mounted on wooden slats, nailed to the crossbars. The resulting cunningly wise device was connected to the network, and the light was turned on and cut down by hand. Homemade pure water, but for its time it turned out to be revolutionary. No other group had such illuminations. A Melody Maker report of October 22, 1966 gives an idea of our typical concert. The slides were excellent colored, frightening, whimsical, beautiful, yet they all seemed a little bland in the cold reality of All Saints Church Hall. The psychedelic version of Louie Louie was quite up to par, but if the band members could combine their electronic avant-garde with melodic and lyrical songs, leaving out the dated R&B, they could do well in the near future. Our repertoire included less and less rhythm and blues standards and more Syd Barrett songs, many of which formed the basis of the first album. Rhythm and blues classic alternated with our long exercises. Given the rather unsystematic approach to management, Peter and Andrew had a truly amazing intuition when it came to finding groups. Pink Floyd is not the only band which they cherished. Although initially they had to deal mainly with us, over time they gave rise to the careers of the Edgar Broughton Band, Roy Harper, Mark Bolan, and Tyrannosaurus Rex, and also worked with Slav Naru and the Third Year Band. Instead of relying on a tried and tested network of clubs and other venues, Peter and Andrew were constantly looking for alternative ways to promote their alternative band. In January 1967, he managed to arrange for us to perform at the Commonwealth Institute, in a beautiful, specially equipped auditorium in Kensington, which was mainly used for solo concerts by performers of some ethnic music.